Have you ever noticed how fairy tales seem to echo themselves? A challenge that appears 3 times, 3 nights, 3 knocks at the door, 3 brothers, 3 sisters, or 3 chances. This repetition isn't laziness or coincidence. It's a language, an ancient psychological code speaking directly to the unconscious. Marie-Louise von Franz, the brilliant student of Carl Jung, understood that fairy tales are not merely stories for children. They are symbolic narratives crafted by the collective psyche. And repetition, especially the triadic pattern, is one of their most potent tools. But why? In psychology, repetition signals importance. What repeats is what the unconscious insists we pay attention to. In dreams, a recurring symbol is never random. It's trying to be heard. The same applies to fairy tales. These stories didn't survive centuries because they were entertaining. They survived because they held essential truths, and those truths were encoded in patterns. 3 isn't just a number, it's a rhythm, a sequence. It represents movement, evolution, and psychological development. The first time something happens, it introduces a problem. The second time, we experience resistance or failure. And only on the third attempt, after inner transformation, does something shift. This is not a narrative trick. It mirrors the way change happens in the human soul. The number 3 is also foundational across cultures and time. Think of body, mind, and spirit, birth, life, and death, past, present, and future. In fairy tales, the repetition of 3 reflects this universal structure, the psyche's attempt to find order, meaning, and progression within chaos. So when we hear a story with 3 trials, 3 magical gifts, or 3 wishes, we are not just being entertained. We are being invited into a pattern of transformation. The tale is whispering. Change doesn't happen all at once. It takes rhythm. It takes cycles. And above all, it takes repetition. Fairy tales teach us that the soul learns in spirals, not straight lines. And through the echoes of the number 3, we glimpse the hidden choreography of our own inner growth. What repeats in your life? And what might it be trying to teach you? There is something deeply satisfying about the number 3. It completes a shape. It finishes a rhythm. 1 is a beginning. 2 is a tension. But 3 resolves. In fairy tales, the number 3 is more than a pattern. It is a symbol of psychic wholeness. Marie-Louise von Franz often emphasized that fairy tales are expressions of the unconscious in its raw, archetypal form. And the number 3 appears again and again because it represents a fundamental process of integration. It is the architecture of inner growth. Think of it. Many of life's natural progressions follow this triadic pattern: thesis, antithesis, synthesis, birth, life, death, morning, noon, night. In psychological terms, it reflects the movement from one-sidedness to balance, from fragmentation to wholeness. In Jungian psychology, the psyche is constantly attempting to reconcile opposites, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, ego and self. But these opposites often generate conflict. If we remain stuck in the tension of 2s, the duality of either-or, we get lost in inner division. The number 3 introduces a third element, a reconciling force. This third element is not a compromise. It is a transcendent function, a creative resolution that arises not by choosing one side, but by holding the tension between opposites until something new emerges. Jung called this the third thing, and it is always transformative. Fairy tales mirror this beautifully. The third brother is usually the one who succeeds, not because he is the strongest or smartest, but because he is inwardly different. He represents a new attitude, a new synthesis. He embodies humility, intuition, or authenticity. He listens to the inner voice, something the older brothers ignore. Likewise, the third challenge is not just another obstacle, it is the turning point. It shows that the hero or heroine has changed. They are no longer reacting in the same way. The third task is passed not through brute force, but through inner alignment, through the emergence of a deeper self. The number 3, then, becomes a symbol of the completed journey, not in the sense of final perfection, but in the sense of psychic integration. It means that the scattered parts of the soul are beginning to speak to each other, that something has become whole, at least for a moment. In a world obsessed with speed and success, fairy tales remind us real transformation is slow, symbolic, and structured. It comes in threes. Because wholeness cannot be rushed, it must be lived, step by step, layer by layer, until the third moment of truth breaks through. And when it does, we recognize ourselves in the story, not as the hero who wins, but as the soul that awakens. Why are there so many stories about 3 brothers? The eldest is often proud and rigid. The second is clever but shallow. And the youngest? He's usually the fool, mocked, underestimated, or ignored. Yet in the end, he's the one who triumphs. This motif is not a coincidence. According to Marie-Louise von France, these 3 brothers are not just characters. They are inner figures, psychological typologies that live within each of us. They represent different attitudes of the ego in its attempt to deal with life, and they show us, symbolically, the evolution of consciousness. The eldest brother is the most conventional. He obeys the rules, respects authority, and tries to succeed by doing what is expected. He represents the established ego, the socially conditioned self that clings to security and status. His downfall is often arrogance or rigidity. He cannot adapt to the demands of the unknown. The second brother is a step away from tradition. He is clever, strategic, sometimes manipulative. He represents the ego that wants to rebel or outsmart the world. He may question the rules, but he is still attached to personal gain. His failure usually comes from superficiality. He lacks depth, humility, or inner grounding. Then comes the third, the youngest. Often dismissed as foolish or lazy, he is actually closest to the unconscious. He listens to animals, helps the poor, speaks with rivers and trees. In symbolic terms, he is open to the irrational, to the archetypal wisdom that the others ignore. He represents what Jung called the transcendent attitude, a mode of being that is no longer driven by ego, but by something deeper, the self. This is why the youngest succeeds, not because he is stronger, but because he is inwardly attuned. He is in contact with the symbolic world, with meaning, with a soul. His path is not about dominance, but about relationship, with nature, with intuition, with mystery. The conflict between the 3 brothers is the conflict within us. One part of us wants to do what's expected. Another wants to control and manipulate. But the part that leads to true transformation is often the least obvious, the most childlike, instinctive, and humble. Fairy tales use this triad not just to entertain, but to guide. They suggest that growth requires the death of the old ego, the sacrifice of arrogance and cleverness, so that the deeper self can emerge. The youngest brother must face ridicule and failure before finding his true power. And so must we. In this way, the tale becomes a map, not of competition, but of integration. Each brother has something to teach, but only when we embrace the fool, the part of us willing to trust the unknown, can the real journey begin. In countless fairy tales, the hero or heroine is faced with three tasks, often strange, impossible, or even absurd. Fetch water in a sieve, separate grains overnight, survive 3 nights in a haunted castle. Why 3? And why must these tasks be completed alone? According to Marie-Louise von France, these stories are not about fantasy. They are about the soul. The 3 tasks symbolize the stages of psychological initiation, the inner transformation required for true growth. They represent the journey of individuation, the process through which the ego confronts and integrates the unconscious, moving closer to the self. The first task usually tests outer ability, courage, strength, or obedience. It corresponds to the ego's encounter with the world, the initial step of leaving behind the familiar and facing something unknown. On this level, the hero still believes that effort alone will bring success. It's the task of the naive ego, still confident in its tools and its identity. But the second task begins to shift the ground. Here, the challenge becomes more subtle, inward, or paradoxical. The hero may fail through pride or doubt. Their usual strategies no longer work. This is the turning point, when the ego realizes it is not in control. The second task reveals the limits of willpower and introduces suffering, confusion, or even despair. It is the psychological dark night, when the known self begins to crack. Then comes the third. The final task is often completed through humility, compassion, or intuition, not by force, but by surrender to something greater. Sometimes, help comes from an unexpected ally, an old woman, an animal, or a forgotten inner voice. This task cannot be conquered in the same way as the others. It is passed only when the ego lets go and allows a deeper intelligence, the self, to emerge. These 3 tasks, then, are not obstacles. They are mirrors. They reflect the inner stages of human transformation. First, action. Then, collapse. Finally, transcendence. Fairy tales preserve this wisdom in symbolic form. They tell us that real initiation doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds in rhythm. 3 steps, 3 trials, 3 awakenings. And it must be earned, not through external victory, but through inner change. To pass the third task is not to win, but to become someone new. What challenge are you facing today that might be your first task? And are you ready for what might come after? It seems like the perfect setup. A magical being offers you 3 wishes. Anything you want. No effort required. Just ask and receive. But in fairy tales, this gift is almost always a trap. Time and again, we see characters wasting their wishes on sausages, wealth, or revenge. Some wish for power and are destroyed by it. Others try to undo their earlier mistakes, only to find themselves back where they started, or worse. What should be a blessing turns into a curse. Marie-Louise von France saw these tales not as warnings against greed, but as deep symbolic lessons about the unconscious. The 3 wishes represent the power of desire and the danger of approaching it without self-awareness. The first wish often comes from the surface, something impulsive, childish, or driven by ego. It's the wish we think we want, the fantasy we've been taught to chase, but it rarely satisfies. That's because it's disconnected from the soul. It's shaped by fear, vanity, or longing for control. The second wish, in many tales, tries to fix the first, but it usually makes things worse. It reflects the ego's attempt to correct its path without truly understanding the inner forces at play. In psychological terms, this is the moment we begin to see that our desires are not as clear or harmless as they seemed. Then comes the third wish. By now, the character is usually humbled. The final wish is made from a place of awareness or even surrender. Sometimes it's a return to simplicity, wishing for things to be as they were. Sometimes it's an unselfish act, restoring someone else's fate. Occasionally, the character gives up the final wish altogether. This reflects a profound transformation, the movement from egoic craving to soulful insight. The pattern of the three wishes mirrors the process of individuation. First, the ego projects its wants onto the world. Then, it suffers the consequences of its blindness. Finally, if the lessons are integrated, it begins to align with something deeper, the self. These tales remind us that desire is not neutral. What we wish for shapes our reality and reveals who we truly are. Wishes are a form of psychological magic. They call forward hidden content from the unconscious. If that content is not examined, it will act through us, often in destructive or ironic ways. So the question is not, what do you wish for? The real question is, who within you is doing the wishing? In the symbolic world of fairy tales, the power of three, even in desire, is a structure of transformation. The wish that frees us is never the first. It's the one born through failure, insight, and the willingness to confront what we didn't know we carried. Be careful what you wish for, not because it might come true, but because it might reveal the part of you you've never dared to meet. One of the most enduring and powerful symbols in fairy tales is the feminine trinity, the maid, the mother, and the crone. This triad represents not only stages of a woman's life, but also deep psychological archetypes present in every soul, male or female. Marie-Louise von Franz, following Jung, showed us that these figures are much more than characters. They are symbolic forces guiding the soul's journey. The maid is youth, potential, and awakening. She is the spark of life, beauty, and hope. In tales, she often appears as the innocent princess, or the curious young woman stepping into the unknown. Psychologically, the maid embodies the soul in its early stages, fresh, open, and eager for experience. But she is also vulnerable, unformed, and in need of guidance. The mother, in contrast, is the embodiment of nurturing, creation, and transformation. She is both giver and protector, the source of life and the comfort of safety. In fairy tales, she may appear as a literal mother, a wise woman, or even a magical helper. On the psychological level, the mother archetype represents the power to contain and transform psychic material. She encourages growth, but also demands responsibility. Finally, the crone represents wisdom, endings, and renewal. She is the keeper of mysteries, the figure who has passed through all stages of life and now stands at the threshold of death and rebirth. The crone is often misunderstood or feared in stories. The witch, the hag, the old woman living on the edge of the village. Yet, she is the ultimate guide to self-knowledge and integration. Psychologically, she symbolizes the deep unconscious, the shadow, and the acceptance of mortality. This feminine trinity is not about age alone. It's a map of inner development. Each stage contains its own gifts and challenges. The maid's innocence must grow into the mother's strength, which in turn must surrender to the crone's wisdom. Together, they reflect the full cycle of the soul's evolution. In fairy tales, we see this triad enacted again and again because it speaks to a universal human process. The soul passes through phases of awakening, nurturing, and finally transcending. Each figure invites us to recognize a part of ourselves we might neglect: the youthful hope, the caring responsibility, or the wise acceptance of change. For both men and women, engaging with the feminine trinity helps balance the psyche. It reveals how life stages are interconnected and how maturity involves embracing all aspects of the feminine, not just the pleasant or socially accepted parts. Through the maid, mother, and crone, fairy tales teach us that wholeness requires honoring the cyclical nature of life and psyche. They remind us that to grow is to journey through these phases, each necessary, each sacred. What part of the feminine trinity do you see in your own life? And how might embracing all three lead you closer to your true self? The number 3 is ancient. It's embedded deep in the roots of human culture, psyche, and storytelling. Yet, despite our modern world filled with technology and data, the power of 3 still resonates today. Why does this ancient code persist in our lives? Marie-Louise von Franz's studies of fairy tales reveal that the triadic pattern isn't just an old storytelling trick. It's a reflection of the structure of the human mind and spirit. Even now, in films, novels, and everyday decisions, we find ourselves drawn to groups of 3. Think about your favorite movies or books. How often do stories unfold in 3 acts? How many protagonists face 3 critical challenges? The rule of 3 remains a cornerstone in art because it mirrors the natural rhythm of understanding and transformation. Beyond entertainment, the number 3 shapes how we process experience. We tend to grasp ideas when presented in 3 parts: beginning, middle, and end, problem, struggle, resolution. This pattern reflects our internal journey from ignorance to awareness, from chaos to order. In psychology, 3 symbolizes wholeness. It bridges opposites and offers synthesis, a space where conflict resolves and new meaning emerges. In a world increasingly complex and polarized, this symbolic function is more vital than ever. Modern life bombards us with information and distractions, yet the number 3 invites pause. It reminds us of cycles, of growth, challenge, and renewal. Whether it's 3 core values we live by, 3 priorities we balance, or 3 steps in a personal habit, this pattern helps anchor us. Even in technology and design, the power of 3 appears. Think of the 3-button mouse, the trilogy of a tech product launch, or 3 main features in an app. These reflect intuitive choices aligning with human cognition. So, why does 3 still matter? Because it is woven into the fabric of human understanding. It is a universal code that helps us make sense of complexity and find rhythm in change. Fairy tales handed down this ancient wisdom, encoding it in simple yet profound ways. Today, as we navigate modern challenges, revisiting this code can offer guidance. It encourages us to honor cycles of trial, reflection, and transformation, the same rhythms the soul has danced with for millennia. In a fast-paced world, the number 3 whispers a quiet truth. Real growth takes time and rhythm. It takes stages, not shortcuts. And it asks us to listen to the patterns beneath the surface of our lives, revealing the path toward wholeness. If these ancient patterns are speaking to something deep within you, don't keep the journey to yourself. Subscribe to the channel for more symbolic insights into fairy tales, Jungian psychology, and the hidden language of the soul. Like the video if it stirred something inside you, and share it with someone who's walking their own path of transformation. The journey may be personal, but it's never solitary. Let's explore it together.